Ah, great. All right, so take number 3. Thank you very much, Nicholas. So let's see. Yeah. So welcome to the stream. Now a couple of things. I'm very tired. I did not expect to be so tired during the stream. Second of all, I will treat this as a regular YouTube video, just so that if people drop in and out, I don't end up talking to myself. But I will answer questions if they come up. And third of all, third thing is that, as I said, there won't be any gameplay of the Cold War mod just yet, but there will be some screenshots at the end of this thing. Should take more or less about an hour. So let's get going. What I'm going to talk about here is the inspiration for the mod, what actually compelled me to make the mod, basic concepts that I'm working around when I'm building the mod, my sources that I'm using for information to incorporate into the mod, the timeline and release schedule, and how I go about revealing content for the mod. All right, so let's go. First of all, yeah. Disclaimer, first of all, is that I don't know anything. Actually, no, I know a couple of things, but I don't know everything. And unfortunately, sometimes I talk like I know everything. So I'm sorry if I come off like that during the stream, but it's something that happens from time to time. Examples that I use here are just examples. It doesn't mean necessarily that this is something which will be in the mod. Everything that you see here is up for change. This is just my approach on creating a total conversion mod. It isn't the correct or the only way, okay? This is just how I chose to do things, and it's very possible that with the feedback that I get, things will change. Okay, there will be no gameplay, we said that already. It'll be done when it's done. I do want to show a release schedule, and I will definitely try to stick to that, and hopefully the mod will be released at the time that I want it to be released, but it could take longer, maybe even shorter. We'll see how that goes. And everything is up for change, said that already. Now let's talk about inspiration. So a little bit about myself. I was born in Soviet Lithuania in 1988, sorry. So yeah, I was born behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union. I feel a bit old because of that. It's a bit weird, but you know, everybody is born somewhere. We don't always can choose where. And now I emigrated to Israel in 1993. The reasons are a bit complex, and I won't get into that right now. This is just where I ended up. I've been gaming since the age of 5, and I'm modding for like the last 10 years probably. Smaller scale, bigger scale, but I really do enjoy that. I speak Hebrew, English, Russian, and I'm learning German. So hopefully I'll be able to know German decently by the time that we get to the German bookmarks. That will help me with information. My previous modding work, well, I have been doing some modding for another non-Paradox game called X2 and X3 by a German developer called Egosoft. And since I've started playing Paradox games, I've been modding mostly Hearts of Iron 3, creating the Modern Day mod. If you've heard about it, then cool. If you haven't, then you're more than welcome to check it out. It's on ModDB. Very easy to install. You just have an installer, and you just run the installer, and the mod is installed. I've learned quite a lot from creating that one. And yeah, so that's my previous modding work. It was also a total conversion mod, so there are similar aspects to the Cold War mod. Now, the reason that I'm looking here is that because here I got my chat, so if there are any questions, I'll occasionally peek to answer them. let's move on. So why make another Cold War mod? One of the funny things that I saw when I announced the mod was that people were like, hey, there's already a Cold War mod. There was already a Cold War mod. Yes, I was aware of that. But there are some things that compelled me to start another one. First of all is that I love modding. It can be very fun. It can also be very frustrating, annoying, and can probably give you cancer occasionally. But in general, it's very fun, especially when things start working and combining together, and you get to tell a story with the game. Second of all is lack of stable, focused alternatives. So yes, we do have Cold War mods, but the ones that I've tried, the Cold War mod, which one is that? I'm not sure which one you're referring to, Nicholas. Yeah, so, well, like I said, the Iron Curtain, right. Okay, so yeah, so I think the Iron Curtain is actually quite a decent mod. I mean, they've put up a lot of work into it, but there are some aspects that I think they missed, and I will probably talk about some of those things, because when I was starting to make the mod, I also was quite close to making those mistakes, or at least what I see as mistakes, and hopefully we won't have that. So another reason to make the mod is because I wanted to learn about the time period. The Cold War is a very exciting time period, so I wanted to learn about that. And I also wanted to teach about the time period, obviously after I've learned about it and I've found a way to present things in a decent way using my mod. The fifth reason is because I wanted a platform with which to demonstrate modding techniques and skills, and in the future when I post more Hearts of Iron 4 lessons, modding lessons, I will probably go back to the Cold War mod and use things as example. Why so late? Well, that's a bit difficult to answer in a very short period, but the thing is that when Hearts of Iron 4 was released, I was not too excited about it. It wasn't amazing, and I've decided to give it some time to see if it gets better. I was also juggling in my head whether I should make a modern day mod or some other time period. Now obviously World War I was also an option, but that one was already taken, and I have to say it's one of the best mods for Hearts of Iron 4. I really like it, I love it, it's a great mod, so I didn't want to make another one. It would not contribute anything. It's also a good idea to wait because Hearts of Iron was so bare bones when it was released. I've decided to wait a bit because I knew that once big updates like Mend the Guns would be released, I would have to redo a lot of work, and I did not want to do that. So now is probably a good time to start, and we'll see how things go. Let's go on. So, which games the mod is inspired by? First of all, we have East versus West. Now, I have to be very clear here. This is just inspiration. It doesn't mean that I'm going to copy-paste these games or ideas from them. So, East versus West, which is quite a sad story for Paradox. I'm sure most of you know what it's about. So that's one inspiration. The other one is Command & Conquer Red Alert. What I like about it is, I would say the goofy aspects, or an alternative Cold War scenario kind of thing. I just love these games, so so I guess that's why they've inspired me to make other games as well. We have Papers, Please. I don't know, maybe some of you have played it. Now, Papers, Please is a very different game, I would say, and I loved it. It really gives you that atmosphere of this communist, authoritarian state where everything is watched and controlled, and you have and everything is done with these papers, and if you don't have the papers, then you're screwed. Well, everything has to be checked, and people trying to run from the country into the country, things like that. It's really a fun game. DEF CON is also a game about total annihilation, with countries just nuking each other until they run out of nukes. So there is some aspect to that, although I have to say that I'm still not clear about how to incorporate nukes into this mod. I'll probably get to that later on. And we also have this War of Mine. If you haven't played, I highly recommend it. It's a game about surviving in a post-war setting where you have to scavenge for resources, and you have to treat the wounded. And obviously, places like Europe and China were quite devastated after their wars. So it gives you some inspiration in that sense. Let's move on. Basic concepts. All right. So, what is Hearts of Iron 4 about? Now, the numbers are just my opinion. You could, I don't know, disagree with them completely. This is just how I see things. So, most of the game, I think, is devoted to combat. We have some aspects devoted to technology, politics. There's quite a big portion devoted to industry, and we have some diplomacy. And the thing is that when you try to make a mod for a game like this, you have to take into account that each of these parts that has more of the game devoted to it will probably have more interface and other aspects which you could expand and which you could make user-friendly, right? So if, for example, we go into politics, when it comes to politics, Hearts of Iron 4 is pretty bad. It's not good. When it comes to politics, it's very shallow. So trying to take politics and expand it greatly is, first of all, quite challenging and probably not really going to work out, since you're very limited in the amount of systems that you have to make that work. I think that with Man the Guns, with the US, with that system that we have for the Congress and the House of Representatives, it's a very shallow system. And on top of everything, it's also incorporated into the decisions, which kind of shows that paradox. I aren't really sure how to handle that thing. I do like it. I mean, I think it has potential, but you can see that it doesn't get its own stage, okay? Its own interface that really allows it to open up and be more than it is today. So this is something to consider when you start or when you approach to make a total conversion mod. So what are the main aspects of the Cold War mod? So obviously we have the battle of ideologies, and that means that in the mod we will have two main factions and two leaders of those factions. Now, this is something that might change, but as I see it right now, it will probably will not change. That means that in the mod, we will only have two factions, and players will not be able to create more factions. So we'll have the Warsaw Pact, and we'll have NATO. And right now, I'm I don't think that it would be wise to allow players to create more factions, since then it kind of throws off the whole battle of ideologies. So I will probably keep that. Second of all, we have the United Nations, which, well, a lot of people, today at least, when you talk about the United Nations, they view it as a complete failure. But in reality, it's much more complex. I mean, the United Nations is a body which history has not seen before its creation, for cooperation, for settling disputes, for aid, for humanitarian aid. So it's a big thing. And I think that it can't be ignored. And this is the reason why this mod is going to put a large emphasis on the United Nations, and it will help to bring the diplomatic game into a very different level. Now, I do have another slide talking about the United Nations, so I won't talk about it anymore for now. The third one are the Proxy Wars. So, as you might know, we had a lot of proxy wars during the Cold War, and we're gonna have a lot of these in the mod as well, since if the two major faction leaders go to war, then it's Armageddon and most probably game over. So there's going to be a lot of build-up to that. Obviously, I don't want to disallow or to completely cancel World War III, but there needs to be a build-up, and proxy wars will be a part of that, and mostly they will be about communists versus other ideologies fighting within countries. Okay, next one is decolonization. So this time period is the period when most of the countries in Africa and in Asia got their independence through war or through some agreement, and we will have a system to represent that. Next one is the the arms race and building up of alliances. So as far as the arms race goes, I do understand that it is about nuclear warheads, and nukes are a very complicated thing in a game like this. So I have to be honest, right now I don't have a very clear vision of how to implement that, but I believe it will come along as the development progresses. But that will obviously be represented in the mod, and the building up of alliances. So you will obviously have NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Now I'm still not sure how we will handle joining countries from outside the usual sphere of these, right? So NATO basically would not have Brazil in NATO, but this is a game after all, so perhaps we will have to diverge from that and allow countries which are not typically in a certain alliance join it as well. The next one is MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction. So that mostly has to do with the tension, right? So it's very important that we have this tension in the game where things could escalate all the time. And each faction leader needs to be prepared, or maybe unprepared, for when things escalate. But the thing is that when things do escalate, there needs to be a way to control and de-escalate them, okay? Before we reach MAD, which is again game over. And because it's game over, it's something that I'm focusing on less at the moment, because when the game is over there isn't much to play, so we'll get to that, but in a much later stage. Okay, so the next one is rebuilding of China and Europe. Obviously, those two were completely wrecked after World War II, and the rebuilding process will be a difficult one. Now, you have to realize that this mod will be going for a lot of years, so the rebuilding process also needs to take up some time. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Further fall of monarchies. Now, monarchies in the mod will get their special attention, since I have a very how should I say this? A very lovable approach to monarchies. So when I play Hearthstone 4, I always prefer to play a monarchy. So monarchies will have their own attention in the mod, and I will talk about that later as well. Next one. So what areas the mod will expand? These are the areas that I plan on expanding the most. Diplomacy is a big thing with the United Nations. We will have influence battles, which is something that I will probably talk about more in the future dev diary. And we have the Marshall Plan and ComCon, which are also part of the diplomatic game, and how you can gain influence or lose influence with other countries. Obviously, we will have the standard usual additions that you have seen in any other mod. So I will not go too in depth about these. As far as the map goes, we will obviously have new nations, new states, new strategic regions, new provinces. Africa will have to be changed quite a bit in the mod, since we do have decolonization. So Africa will get a lot of love. We'll have modern units. Research with new techs and research groups. I was asked today on Discord how I'm going to represent the space race, and that will mostly be represented with research, with countries reaching or researching certain technologies first and getting some bonuses to that. As far as industry goes, I'm still not sure how to expand on that. How to change that, excuse me. But we'll have a look at that, and any improvement that can be made will be made in the mod. Let's go on. So how to distribute the game resources. Now, this is one thing that unfortunately some mods forget, is that when they start putting a mod on top of an already resource intensive game, they need to take some things into account. And by the way, this is a mistake that I have done with my previous total conversion mod. It was unfortunately at its latest version not as playable as I would like it to be, because the core game just couldn't handle all the additions. And I've learned my lesson, and I'm certainly don't want to repeat that with this mod. And it's a paradox, right? Yeah, it's a paradox, because when you add more content, you drive the performance down. And another thing that you drive down is clarity, right? So when somebody starts up your mod and he hasn't seen it before, and he is bombarded with options and buttons and features, then it can hurt the clarity, and it could lead even to people abandoning the mod. It's like, I turned on the mod, it seems too complex, I don't want to play it. So you need to take that into account, and you can add all of these things: more states, more leaders, more techs, more events, more ideologies, more countries. But do you really need to? You really need to think about what you want to add. What will actually improve the game? What can be made user-friendly, and not just as another filler, which will make it look like there's something. when in fact it's very shallow. So this is another thing that I'm watching closely as I go on with the development of the mod, and I hope that I can balance those two. It is a balancing game, but I will do my best. And I do have a test case when I'm viewing this thing, which is more ideologies. Now, I have seen mods, Hearthfire 4 mods, which have added a ton of ideologies, right? You have all these parties, all of these things, and the thing is that they almost contribute nothing. And in a lot of cases, they're also very shallow because each ideology has a requirement. So let me just go over this thing. Let's say that I want to add in my mod 10 new ideologies, right? To make it more in-depth, whatever. So each ideology will require 3 flags, 3 files of flags, the large one, the medium one, and the small one. Each ideology will probably require at least 1 minister, and we'll need an icon for each ideology. So overall, we have 10 icons, at least 1 minister, and 3 flags. Now let's say that on top of that, in my mod, I'm adding 10 countries. So now it means that each country needs 30 flags to represent the 10 ideologies that I added. It needs 10 ministers, right? So a minister for each ideology, which is something that you usually don't even get. I mean, mostly the game just brings up this generic minister. And you need tech graphics for countries, right? So if you're changing the tech tree, it's usually a good idea to have a specific unit for that country. So that means that we've added about 300 flags. We've added 100 ministers, and we've added 60 tech graphics. Now, what this means for the performance of the game is quite horrible. It means that the game now has 470 new assets just from 10 ideologies in 10 countries, and it has 200 assets that need to be constantly monitored. It needs to always refresh and see if something has changed. And this is a big drive that kills performance. So you really need to be careful about what you're adding and how much it's adding to the game and to the mod. And this is something that I've had some conflicts with. So when I was starting the mod, I did want to have a bit more ideologies, and eventually I did this scale thing that you can see on the screen right now. And I've asked myself, what are the losses, what are the gains? And I've realized that I'm not gaining enough in comparison to what I'm losing. And so there will be a screenshot later on, so you'll see how much ideologies we have. So I had to let that go, and I have to say that it hurt quite a bit. I was not happy with letting it go, but I have realized that it's necessary. It's necessary because performance and clarity are much more important than what I would gain here, which would be an illusion of political death, which can be expanded since Hearthfire 4 doesn't have any systems for politics. I mean, I don't know if you know, but when it comes to elections, the game doesn't even have a built-in system that determines which ideology wins elections. So what's the point, right? So that had to go. And hopefully maybe in the future there will be an update which will completely turn this thing on its head, and then I'll have to make the necessary adjustments, but for now it just wasn't worth it. Okay, so another aspect that we have in the mod is the battle of ideologies. I'm done talking about the additions and stability and stuff like that. So as far as the battle of ideologies goes, we need a clear difference in game terms between two different sides and how they run their countries and economy, since we've had this battle of economic systems and political systems. And we also have a battleground. The battleground are other countries, not the two main players. So this goes back to the Proxy Wars that I talked about. And it'll be quite a challenge to make it fun, right? Since Proxy Wars aren't the big thing in Hearthstone 4. And here they will have to be the main way to advance your agendas. And I certainly hope that we will get it right and that it will be fun. I know that it's possible to do, but it will require some testing, adjustments, things like that. So each side needs to have its strong weak points despite historical outcome to allow for a non-historical path. Now, I'm sorry if I'm disappointing anyone, but yeah, the Soviet Union collapsed. It did not work out. Now, there was a lot of debate about why it happened, what were the reasons, but ultimately something wasn't working. So when you look at it, it seems like their system was less efficient and had less chances for survival. But in the game, I do want it to be more even, right? So that we don't necessarily have communism as the losing side. We do want some alternate history. So each one of these will have their advantages and disadvantages to allow for that. Okay, now there's a screenshot. Now, if you're worried about the minister pictures, please note that I have taken a decision not to put too much time in leader portraits right now. It is possible to make them quite amazing, but it takes a lot of time. And currently I don't think it's the most important aspect in the mod. So any minister picture that you see right now and possibly at release, please take note that it's quite possible that it will be improved and will look much better in future versions of the mod. Okay, so let's go back a bit to how we want Hearthstone 4 to work and what it's about and how we implement things. So the perfect Paradox game would be, as the pie chart indicates, a game that has all of these aspects: politics, combat, diplomacy, technology, industry, and each part has the same share of the pie, right? Each of these parts is as in-depth and has the same level of interaction with the player. But unfortunately, that's not what Hearthstone 4 is. We've talked about it. So I need to design things to fit the things that Hearthstone 4 is about. As you can see, even here in the mod, the stuff that's related to war takes a majority in the country panel. And that is a clear indication that ultimately this game is about war. It's not about politics. It's not about research and science. It's ultimately just about killing the other guy. But I do want to make sure that just before you kill the other guy, you have a diplomatic option that perhaps will allow you to kill him softly. Okay. So why do we want Hearthstone 4 to be this way, right? First of all, is the desire to change the world not only with violence. I think that this is one of the greatest appeals about Victoria 2. Victoria 2 really allows you to build up a country without necessarily always fighting. And there is a good feeling about it, right? I mean, sure, violence might be the answer most of the times, but it's fun when you can achieve your goals in a bit of a more sophisticated way. Second of all is that constant war is exhausting. So yeah, so fighting all the time and keeping your readiness all the time is quite exhausting. So I think that players do want an alternative to that, something that will allow them to, again, advance their goals without necessarily being on the edge all the time. And it is also a reason why the game is so short, because you can only keep, or you can only stay on your toes for so long. The third thing is that we need something to do before the war and during occasional pauses of conflict. And I think that Hearts of Iron 4 has done a decent job at filling the gap between the war and perhaps small pauses or countries that aren't fighting, but there needs to be more done, and hopefully we will see that in the future. I think that it's been hinted by Paradox that we will have an espionage addition to the game, and that will probably bring in a whole new level of playing. Hearts of Iron 4 isn't really meant to stop once war gets going. Yeah, so once the big boom goes, it's not supposed to stop. And that is a big problem for a mod like this, or for any mod that isn't the, I don't know what, the World War I mod. But there are ways to get around that, and that's what I'll try to do. Non-war systems are secondary at best, and this is also something that I talked about, is that mainly we are talking about war here, and anything which is not related to war has a very minuscule and small portion in the game. Makes extensive timeline mods non-compatible. And yeah, this is the hard and difficult truth, is that long mods are really not compatible with this game, and you really need to work to make it work, right? It's sad, but it's true. But we'll do our best. Let's go on. So, what are the main ideologies that we will have in the game? So these are the ideologies. We will have an ideology for colonial nations. The reason for that is because they are really like a unique thing. They don't really fall into the other categories, and it's also required for wars of liberation. That's why we have this one. So it's used only for colonial nations. After becoming independent, can switch to any of the other ideologies depending on popularity of each of these during times of independence. And when we will have a war of independence, what will basically happen is that the new nation will declare war as a civil war on the colonial government, and that's going to be the colonial conflict, the colonial war. We have our democratic ideology from the base game, from the vanilla game, so no need to explain that one. We have our monarchical ideology, which is reserved for monarchies. As I said, monarchies are going to be quite a big deal in this mod, and they do deserve to have their own ideology. I think it's been talked about that even Hearts of Iron 4 should probably have its own ideology for monarchies, since right now the whole aspect of switching between a non-aligned or a fascist state and a monarchy it doesn't feel natural, it doesn't feel fluent. So we'll have that one as well. Please note that monarchical ideology countries are more friendly towards democratic countries. This is supposed to represent the support of countries like the United States, of monarchies. For example, if we take Iran and the Shah, which was supported by the United States and the United Kingdom. Trying to think of another example. We do have Jordan, which is up to these days is greatly supported by the United States, and Saudi Arabia, and there are probably other examples as well. And on the other side of the fence, we have our communist ideology, similar to the vanilla one. And we have the neutral or autocratic ideology, which is supposed to represent mostly anti-colonial, anti-monarchical forces, more friendly towards communism, since they will be supported by communist countries, mainly the Soviet Union. Okay, so these are our ideologies. Now I'm going to talk a bit about the importance of countries in the mod. So we have some countries which are going to be a bit more important, and this will obviously be reflected in the attention that they get, focus trees, things like that. So at the top spot, we do have the Soviet Union and the United States. They should both be at the top, but I just decided to put it this way. So both of these will get a lot of attention, and obviously will be the most in-depth countries in the mod. We have communist China and nationalist China, who are quite a big deal as well, and it was a battlefield of ideologies even before the Cold War began. And there will be quite an interest in either turning China into an American backed state or a Soviet Union backed state. We will have the United Kingdom and France and Germany as our European representatives, which will get quite a bit of love. When it comes to Germany, obviously East and West Germany will have an equal measure of attention. So those are our most important countries, our majors. The secondary countries, which will also get quite a lot of attention in the mod, are India, Vietnam, North Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, Netherlands, and Portugal. Now, you will notice that some of these are colonial nations, like India, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And as I said before, decolonization is quite a big aspect in the mod. So this is why these countries are listed here. And another reason is because their wars of independence, except for Korea, and are at the beginning of the mod. So I do want them to be as playable as possible upon initial release of the mod. Next, the United Nations. So we've talked about the United Nations before, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit more now. So for the United Nations, the most important aspect that we'll have in the mod is the Security Council. We have the General Assembly of the United Nations, but nothing really to do with them. So they will not really be represented in the mod much. We will have a lot of things to do with the Security Council. So the Security Council mechanics, which I will talk about in a future dev diary, will be inspired by the Victoria 2 crisis system. And if you haven't played that, then I would recommend that you install Victoria 2 as fast as possible and give it a try, since it's probably one of the more brilliant systems in a Paradox game that we had. So that's the inspiration for the system, which I actually already have in the mod, and it's working like 95%. There are some things to finish. It should allow for reduction of tensions if sides are interested in resolving a conflict without dragging themselves into war, right? So in order not to reach mad and to destroy the world and themselves, the major powers or even smaller Security Council powers will have the option to use the Security Council to diffuse tensions and solve things in a more peaceful way. It is the main executive power. The main executive power is the UN Security Council. I've talked about that. Will have its own mechanic, as I said. Resolutions concerning countries should have clear benefits for countries who choose to abide by the resolution. So let me just think of an example. So in the mod, for example, if there is a territorial dispute, the resolution of that territorial dispute will go through the United Nations Security Council, and countries that accept or abide by the decision that has been reached by the Security Council will have candy or will be rewarded, right, as opposed to countries that will not. So ignoring a resolution or a resolution decision should have clear consequences, and it's dependent on context. When I say consequences, I of course mean things like sanctions by the United Nations Security Council, which could damage your research and could damage your perhaps production and ability to trade. So if you want to build, or if you want to have a lot of weapons for an upcoming war, and you are now sanctioned by the United Nations, that might prove to be much harder to do. So the last point is that it needs to be interactive by the AI and the player. Now I just want to put an emphasis there. Making sure that the AI uses all the new systems and is using them wisely is quite a bit of work. So you have to be ready for the fact that upon initial release, the AI might be doing some crazy stuff, some non-related stuff, but that will obviously be patched and fixed as I receive feedback from players. Also, in general, the AI in Hearthstone 4 can be quite unpredictable or even stupid at times, so that has to be taken into account. What's next? So Proxy Wars, the best way for two major players like the United States and Soviet Union to switch a country to their ideology, which cannot be switched diplomatically. So when it comes to switching ideologies in the game, we will have two approaches. You can either pressure a country in diplomatic means or rewards to switch to your ideology, or you could go down and destabilize the country enough so that it has a civil war, at the end of which, if you've provided enough support to your side, it will switch to your ideology, and as part of that will probably join your faction, which ultimately, when the big war comes, will give you more nations on your side to fight the enemy. So success of opponents depends almost entirely on outside assistance. So war starts out on a more or less equal terms. I'm not sure that the Spanish Civil War is a good example for that, but what it means is that when we do have a civil war in a country, for it to be interactive and interesting, the terms need to be more or less equal, so that when, for example, a player that plays the United States or the Soviet Union, when he puts the efforts and the time and the resources into an opposing side, he gets the feedback that his actions have consequences, and that the side that he's supporting is winning because of that support. So a winning side removes almost all influence of opposing ideology in the country. So if I've supported a democratic aspect of a country and they won, then that means that that country is more or less forever on my side now, as a reward for my efforts. Occasional pauses in war may occur due to UN intervention, allowing human players to reconsider the situation until fighting resumes. Now, this aspect is still not something that I'm totally clear about how it will be implemented. But when we have a civil war in a big country, it's usually a good idea to have a pause from time to time, so that all sides can take a break, decide how to move forward, and then resume in case we don't have a German or Korean split like we have or we had with these countries. So another thing that we will have in the mod are influence battles. This is also a system which is almost ready in the mod at this moment, and I will have a development diary devoted to that I will talk about. That means that we will have one non-aligned nation, or it could be a nation that has a monarchy. And when the two major sides decide that they want that country on their side, there will be diplomatic actions that they can do, which eventually could cause a civil war. So there are some steps to this, right? So we have the initial pressure, where both sides take interest in the country. The country benefits from this attention because it gets all kinds of rewards, and obviously each side is trying to pull it towards its own sphere. Ultimately, if both sides continue to pressure the country, we will get to a stage of political instability, and if that continues, then we are going to a civil war, which will have the benefits that we talked about. One thing that allowed me to implement the system was the reduction in ideologies. The thing is that democracies are a problem because democracies have a lot of sub-democracies in the game. And when you have these sub-democracies, right, for example, if you have conservatives and you have social democrats, it's quite difficult to let the game know which one the player supports. And that means that you could have a scenario where conservative Republican United States is supporting another country, and then when it comes to a civil war, we have a social democratic government fighting against communists, which is a bit weird since these ideologies do have some very basic concepts that are similar to both of them. So that is why it's another good reason to have very clear two sides, and then also the AI is much better at handling things like these. Okay, so decolonization. We will have peaceful versus non-peaceful decolonization options, each with its own benefits. Now, decolonization is obviously a big deal, and any country that decolonizes has quite a lot to lose. One benefit will be that obviously they don't have to drag themselves into a war now, and perhaps they will be more ready when a more important war comes up. The two main players must have key interest in decolonization as a bargaining chip to advance their goals, right? So for example, if I'm playing the United States and we have a civil war in a British colony that's trying to break free, then I, as a United States, can either ask the United Kingdom to support me, I don't know, maybe on a what's the word I'm looking for, on a Security Council resolution, and if they don't, then perhaps I will stop helping them against that decolonization war. So there's a lot of things here that connect, right? And this is what I meant when I said that diplomacy has to be this big thing that players will probably be using a lot more in the mod. The next point is that decolonization is a drive for European unity to compensate lost resources and land. Oh wow, I think we've gone beyond an hour. Okay, so drive for European unity to compensate lost resources and land. Now I know that it will probably be a very popular thing for players playing the mod to start up as, I don't know, maybe Germany, and then go down a certain path and try to just declare war on everybody and conquer Europe. Now, I'm not saying that it won't be possible. It will be possible. But the other alternative is unity of European countries to stand up against a bigger aggressor, because decolonization will weaken these European countries quite a lot. So they will have to come together to be stronger. And the last point is that I definitely want it to be better than how it's done in vanilla currently. Paradox, to be honest, I don't know why, but they have decided that in Mend the Guns, they want to introduce decolonization despite the fact that it's not really part of the time period. And the way that they have handled it is poor. Perhaps even unprofessional, I would say. I would expect more. And to be honest, I would, with the current way that it's implemented, I would rather not have it than have it the way it is now, because it's just bad. So I'm not sure that they should have put it in the game to begin with. All right, our next thing are the important countries when it comes to decolonization, and specifically the Arab countries. Now, Egypt was not a colony by this time, but it will be a puppet of the United Kingdom, and that is like a second stage after countries have been decolonized, and Egypt will have to find its way to shake off the British influence. Then we have Algeria. The Algerians' independence war was, I think, one of the deadliest ones. So we will have a big emphasis on that. We will have Syria and Iraq also as countries that have to find their way after independence. Libya and Israel, and at the end will actually play a minor role since, well, okay, I live in Israel, but the country is so small on the map that you can't really do a lot with it. We will obviously have the Israeli-Arab War, but hello George, hi, welcome to the stream. But what was I saying? But Israel is really not that of a big deal in the mod, so just so you know. As far as African countries, so we mentioned some of these. We will have Algeria, we will have Angola. The Angolan war for independence was quite a big deal with a lot of countries involved. The Congo. The Congo will be more about the conflicts after independence. I mean, that place, I don't think still hasn't really recovered or I should say really, yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. We will also have Rhodesia. Now Rhodesia is quite a complicated topic since there wasn't really an independence war there, but the whole relationship between white settlers and the African natives, that will have to be represented somehow. We'll probably will have an influence battle over Rhodesia at some point. So South Africa, apartheid, all of that, and Nigeria as well. Yeah. Okay, what's next? So the arms race and alliances. So let's talk about some of these. The driving force to prepare sites for World War III is the arms race, right? So when the next war comes, all sides want to be ready, and building up your alliances is one of those ways to be ready. Needs to be gradual with restrictions in terms of world tension war support. So that means, well, the war has quite some time to play, so we can't have the United States having millions of nukes 2 years after the beginning of the mod. So it'll be a slow process. Non-aligned countries should be encouraged to pick a side. That means that if you're playing a non-aligned country, you would be quite encouraged to pick a side, or a side will be picked for you, and there will be ways to do that. Eventually, you'll probably be better off picking up a side. I know that we had the non-aligned movement, but when it comes to this game, I'm really not sure if we can represent that well. I will definitely give it a thought. I will definitely try, but in the larger scheme of things, you will definitely be encouraged to pick a side. If you don't, there will be a penalty, but it will not be a really harsh one, since I do want players to have a way to do their own thing. So only 2 alliances in the game, led by USA and the Soviet Union. I've talked about this at the beginning. I will probably not allow in the mod any more factions to be added than the 2 that we know, the Warsaw Pact and NATO. Proxy wars should be costly to demonstrate the danger of full-blown war, reduce stockpiling of weapons and manpower. We talked about proxy wars, and one of the ways that they will contribute is that they will be killing units, so we will gain performance, and obviously it's a way to build up your alliance, because after a proxy war you will have a guaranteed country that will probably join your alliance. Mutual assured destruction, so nukes should be option of last resort. Now I have to say now that I'm still not clear about how nukes will work. One of the biggest problems is the AI, which teaching the AI or telling it how to probably use nukes is actually quite difficult. So we'll see how that will be handled. And need to be buffed to become a game changer, unlike in vanilla. I'm not sure if things have changed much, but the last time that I nuked a country in Hearthstone 4, it wasn't really that much of a big deal. Becoming a nuclear country should be difficult and diplomatically challenging. So when we have these 2 sides that have a monopoly on nuclear weapons, they obviously don't want other countries to get them. So the whole idea of getting nuclear weapons in the mod will be quite a challenge, but obviously in the end, when you get nuclear weapons, you will be much more guaranteed from destruction. Number 4, ways to implement the nuclear triad. Again, something which is still being looked at and worked on, but I definitely hope to implement that. In case some of you don't know what the nuclear triad is, it's the ability to deploy nukes in 3 ways, with bombers, with missiles, and with submarines. Number 5, AI is a big problem when it comes to using nukes. So I've talked about that, and that hopefully not, but may lead to nukes being available only to the player until he nukes an AI country, at which point the AI country can retaliate. All right. The concept of rebuilding of Europe. So much of Europe is wrecked after World War II. Yeah, George, definitely. Yeah, I will upload this one to YouTube. And as I said at the beginning, I'm talking through this whole thing as if it's a YouTube video, unless you ask questions. That way, it kind of makes more sense, right? So yeah, it will be on YouTube if you missed the beginning. So, rebuilding of Europe, much of Europe is wrecked after World War II. That means that there will be a rebuilding effort, and most European countries will be focused on that, on rebuilding their countries after the war. There is a power vacuum for 2 major players, the United States and the Soviet Union. And there will be systems to fill up that vacuum power. So, and as an example, it's the Marshall Plan for the United States and COMCON for the Soviet Union. 2 things that I will talk about in a dev diary in the future. Decolonization and a weak Germany need to be a driving force for unity instead of conflict in Europe. So one of the key points is that Europe should try to unite to become more powerful rather than fight itself, which after unity could potentially attack a bigger opponent or defend itself better in case it's attacked. Old conflicts and border adjustments should not be prohibited, but should clearly be the abyss in case Europe goes to war again. So after World War II, there was still a lot of territorial disputes in Europe, and a lot of these were solved either through the Security Council or through other systems implemented specifically for Europe. And you will have an option to resolve those conflicts that way, or you can go rogue. But the consequences need to be clear. Any country that, once again, involves Europe in war risks another big conflict that could potentially just destroy Europe again. Soviet Union must have the tools to maintain communist bloc. Process should become harder as game progresses, but not impossible. So as I said sometime previously in the stream, yes, the Soviet Union collapsed, but in the mod, it's not the only way it's not the only path for the Soviet Union. So they should have a way to preserve the communist bloc, the Iron Curtain, but because they are ruling other countries, the price for doing that will increase as time goes on. Number 6, early implementation of EU reforms and building of ties between former enemies, Germany, France, Poland, and the Balkans, which goes again into the whole process of rebuilding of Europe and how these countries come together instead of driving themselves into conflict. All of these things will be represented in the mod. All right, now let's talk a bit about China. Now this stream was supposed to be an hour, but we've gone past that. I'm sorry for that, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So China, the fate of China on balance as an autocratic leader of the non-aligned movement or a communist powerhouse. Now, when I said before that I'm not sure how the non-aligned nations and movement will be represented, one direction that I have is that China might take that role after the end of the Chinese Civil War. Obviously, if not the communist side wins. Civil war should be test ground for major players to test their strengths, and gain new battlefield experience. So the Chinese Civil War could become much longer in case both sides continue, the United States and the Soviet Union continue to pour resources into that war. Historically, as far as I can tell, the United States got tired of supporting their side in the Chinese Civil War, and that is the reason why we have communist China today, but obviously that doesn't have to be the case in the mod. Post-war China, mainly concerned with rebuilding, but should be able to react to international changes and perhaps even form its own faction. As I said, China might become the potential leader for the non-aligned movement. When it comes to communist China, that's something to see if they should automatically join the Soviet Union or if they will have an option to do their own thing. Historically, they went and did their own thing, so I would obviously want to have a way to represent that. And one last thing, I think that's our last concept, which is the last stand of the monarchies. So as was after World War I, post-World War II, will be a challenge for remaining monarchies to survive. So monarchies will have to struggle to survive in the mod, and I hope to make that process interesting and fun to play. Players should be given a choice if they want to be a monarchy and fight for survival or switch to a republic. If monarchies manage to survive, should be a driving force for former monarchies to attempt a comeback. If we do get a lot of monarchies that manage to survive, then I certainly hope to give players a chance to revive older monarchies that fell after World War I and II. A mechanic needed to transition between despotic monarchies and constitutional ones. One of the ways that monarchies could survive are constitutional monarchies. Now, obviously it's not the same thing, but it is still a type of monarchy, and I do want to give the players a way to not destroy their country and still have some kind of monarchy in place. Monarchies have a love-hate relationship with the United States and need the United States to survive the anti-monarchy coups encouraged by the Soviet Union. As I have shown in that slide before, monarchies will be more dependent on the United States to survive, and the Soviet Union will have a clearly anti-monarchical attitude. Now, obviously, if it's a player playing the Soviet Union, they might go the other way around, but they will not have the same systems to support monarchies as the United States might have. So important countries when it comes to monarchies are Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Ethiopia, Greece, Thailand, and other monarchies in the Indochina region. Egypt had its monarchy removed in quite a violent way with a coup. Iran, the same thing. Iraq, the Hashemite monarchy in Iraq was actually murdered. Quite a bloody one, a gruesome one, I have to say. I'm not even sure why. This is something that requires some research. The Ethiopian monarchy was also removed, but not in such a bloody way, more like a coup. The Greek monarchy was removed, as far as I can tell, with a referendum, but I could be wrong. And I'm not really familiar with the Thai monarchy, but I will obviously put the research into it once I start putting more effort into Thailand. Okay, so the timeline of the mod. This is our timeline. So the mod will begin in 1946. The main aspects of that bookmark are going to be the Chinese Civil War and the Greek Civil War. And as I said, China is going to be quite a big and nasty test ground for the battle of our ideologies. The next one will be the 1948 bookmark, which is the Arab-Israeli War, then the Korean War, the Suez Crisis, the Vietnam War, 1979 with the invasion of Afghanistan, and the last bookmark will be at 1989, which is the fall of the Berlin Wall, and followed by the collapse of the Soviet Union, which the player will have an option to stop and perhaps avoid. So my sources for working on the mod. So first of all, Wikipedia. Yes, I know what people say about Wikipedia, but we can't deny the fact that currently it is a very accessible source of information. And some of that information has to be double checked, and I'm definitely doing my best to do that. But just so you know that some information is based on Wikipedia, and I think that when we didn't have Wikipedia, we would probably not have all these mods. So it's a good source overall. Second, Cold War documentaries on YouTube, Netflix, and other sources. So I've taken the time to watch some documentaries, and obviously when I approach some aspects of the mod or doing some or investing in some countries, then I am looking into documentaries that are specific to that subject or that country. The third one is a book called Post-War by Tony Judt. I actually have it here. I'm not sure if you guys can see it. This is the Hebrew version of the book. I would actually prefer to read the English one, but we didn't have it here. It's a great book. It mostly deals with Europe post World War II. Quite fascinating, quite interesting, and I hope to finish it before I finish the mod. It's quite a big one. The next one is Historical Atlas of the World. Here as well. This is it. Quite a nice resource. Has a lot of maps that have helped me to structure the world. See, I don't know if you can see it. This is a map. It's also in Hebrew, unfortunately, but you use what you can. So these are my sources. Obviously, I will have other sources as well as I continue to develop the mod. And I do try to double check and make things as accurate and correct as possible, but mistakes might be made, and any corrections and feedback are always welcome. Now, let's talk a bit about the release schedule for the mod. So June, July 2019 is when I plan to have the first release, the first alpha release of the mod. The main reason or the main purpose of this release is to test critical aspects of the mod, which I would rather have some feedback on before I implement them deeper into the mod. and so that I don't have to do major rework after I add content into the mod. During this release, only majors will be decently playable at that point. And again, this is because I want to test some things and make sure that they work before I go too in-depth into other things, and put in the time and the effort and not have to rework the whole thing. September 2019 will hopefully be the release of a stable beta, which will include the first 2 bookmarks and all the major powers playable. I'm talking about the Soviet Union, United States, France, Germany to a degree, and the United Kingdom. And hopefully decolonization implemented as well. It's going to be quite a big thing, so it will require some time. Early 2020, release of first release candidate, which will have fully functional majors and secondary nations. What I mean by this is that they will have their focus trees, decisions, technologies, all of that. Focus tree will extend to 1961 for all of these countries, and hopefully we'll have a better functioning AI, which will be using the new systems in a much more smart way. Mid 2020 is the release of a graphical update, which will change the interface. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm mostly sticking to the vanilla interface, and I'm making things look as close to the vanilla interface as possible. But at some point, I would like an overhaul to the interface to make it more unique. And improved portraits, since, first of all, right now I have some awful portraits, and some of them are better, some of them are worse, some of them are quite good, but I would like to have a high level of portraits, but it's not something that I want to get too invested in right now, since it's not game breaking if a portrait looks not as good in the game. So late 2020, finish all the bookmarks, extend the focus trees to 3rd level countries. So second, 3rd level countries, which weren't really a big part of the Cold War period, but which are still interesting to play. I want to expand those. And early 2021, we'll see what happens. We'll see how the mod goes. So I still don't know how things will be, but I will probably have some plans for that time. Okay. Now, when it comes to content reveal, now I'm visiting Reddit quite a lot, and we do have the occasional posts about other mods. And one thing that I noticed is that, in a nutshell, some mods just post everything. And that, for me at least, brings me to a point where I'm not really as curious to play the mod as I was before they just wrote about everything and every possible way to play the mod. So what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to revealing content in the mod and revealing things about the mod, I have a different approach, which means that I will not be revealing everything. I will be showing like only points of features, and all the other stuff will be up to you to discover. So don't expect these very detailed reveals of what every button or every focus tree is going to do. I just don't believe in that. I think it's much more interesting to discover it yourself once you play. But critical aspects or aspects which need some explaining will be talked about more. But just so you know, this is my approach, and I hope that it will create a more interesting situation when you finally get to play the mod. And okay, so we've reached almost the end of this thing, and I would like to share some screenshots. Let's see. So yeah, so this is the first one. And what I wanted to show here is that one thing that the Soviet Union will be busy with at the beginning of the mod is to reincorporate its eastern troublesome parts. After World War II, countries like the Baltic states and Ukraine were quite autonomous, and the Soviet Union had to spend some time to consolidate its hold and its administration of these parts. So expect some interaction with these regions as the Soviet Union. As you can see here, these countries are, well, they're not independent, right? But they are separate from the Soviet Union, and you will have to invest some resources and time to reincorporate them and get all the benefits from these regions once again. Hopefully this is something that will keep the player busy until the first conflict erupts in the game. So that's that. This is just a screenshot of the United Kingdom and its various puppets and colonies. Now, this icon has just not been updated. Obviously, it'll have a different icon, not with these Japanese letters. So don't worry about that. Most of the British, French colonies will be separate on the map and will have their own administrations that the player can interact with. And as they move closer to the decolonization, more options will pop up about how decolonization will be handled in each of these countries. And probably the last one, yeah, this one is showing some Marshall Plan aspects of the mod. As I said, I think several times during this stream, I will have a separate development diary that will talk extensively about the Marshall Plan. It's going to be quite a big deal in the mod, and will probably give a lot of leverage and ability to influence countries for the players playing the United States. And the Soviet Union will have its own system with ComCon, which will actually work in a very similar way to the Marshall Plan, with small differences. All right, so thank you for your time. Yeah, this is it. We've gone for like an hour and a half. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to take them now. If you don't, then that's fine. And I certainly hope that it gave you some clarity about the mod and how things will work. Yeah, okay, George, let's see. Yeah, guerrilla warfare. Well, I think that the closest thing to guerrilla warfare in the mod will be the anti-colonial forces that will be fighting for freedom, and let's say their type of freedom and the form of government that they want to have. I'm not sure that Hearthstone 4 has any decent systems to properly incorporate guerrilla warfare, but with decolonization being such a big part of the mod, I will definitely spend some time to give emphasis to non-country on country warfare, or typical country on country warfare. Yeah, so I hope that answered your question, George. I hope that's okay. Okay. So this is all I wanted to say about the Cold War mod. Okay. Cool. Okay, so expect the development diary to come soon. The thing is that the reason why I didn't reveal a lot of content during this stream is because I don't want people getting the wrong impression or see unfinished systems or things that will change, and then it might just cause confusion. But the development diary will come quite soon, and I certainly hope you will enjoy the mod when you get to play it finally. So again, thank you for watching. Have a good night or good morning. I'm not sure if you're in the United States, if it's morning now. And we might have some of these streams in the future. So thank you for watching. And that's the end of that. Bye-bye.